And while folks are waiting, I am going to advance to the next slide just to showcase some of the upcoming events that we have coming up. So we have a series of great anti-oppression webinar trainings that we would love for folks to sign up for. You can see the link here. We will also be hosting a webinar updating folks on where we are at in our Net Zero Stretch Code campaign sometime in the last week of April. So keep an eye out for an email about that in the next week or so. And we are also reminding folks that have the means to that giving is a really great way to support our program work during this time. And so you can do so by clicking on the link below or by copying and pasting it.
And so that folks know, we will send everybody a recording of this that you can share with folks, and then we'll also send you the slides. Because I know sometimes with the links and stuff like that, it's just easier to get it later. I see nodding heads. Oh, and another detail for you guys is that the anti-oppression webinar series, so this was originally intended to be a full-day training, a full-day in-person training back when we did these things. And so given what's going on, we have changed that and changed it into a series of 3 one-hour webinars. We're asking that folks make the commitment to join all 3 of them. You'll see if you go to sign up for it that we do ask you to do that, just because they build on each other, and you would you'd basically not be able to sort of hit the ground running in the second one if you hadn't been to the first one. So just a little detail for folks. We'll give it just a couple more minutes. I see that more folks have joined. I also see that some folks have left, so I think people are having some internet problems. What else is new? Seems to be the way of life these days. And also, so that folks know, we are recording this. I know I mentioned that we would send out the recording, but what that means is that we are recording. So if you are uncomfortable with having your face be a part of the recording of this, please go ahead and turn off your video camera. And that is your lower left, at least on my computer. There's a little mute audio button, which you guys should already be muted. There's an audio for hearing, and then there's your video. So that would be where you would turn off your video if you're uncomfortable being a part of the recording.
Wonderful. So it is 5 past, so I think we're going to go ahead and kick things off. My name is Rebecca Wintrick-Knox, and I will be giving a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. And this is actually a unique webinar. I think it's the first webinar that we've done with all 4 of us on staff. Carol, Mish, Drew, and I will all be presenting, which is lots of fun. Okay, so this is our webinar on taking action during this time of distancing. And we're going to go over how you can take action on the local level, through town meeting and through municipal energy efficiency plans, on the state level through comments to the EEA and through the legislature, and also on the federal level. And just a heads up, folks, we will have time for moderated Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop those in the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And just a housekeeping note, please don't try and answer other people's questions because it can be a little distracting. So to set the stage for our webinar, as we all know on this call, climate change is happening and it has very severe impacts across the Commonwealth. But luckily, we know as an organization of grassroots activists that local action is the way that we can meaningfully act on climate. And we know that local has always truly led on making progressive change, that if we wait for state and federal decision makers to lead the way, we'll be waiting a lot longer than we want to be. But if we start from the grassroots up, that's how we can make change happen. And the good news is that we have the tools. This is a great picture of what a wonderful, inclusive, transit-oriented community could look like. And we have the tools that will allow us to create these communities that we want to live in. And a motto that MCAN has recently become really fond of is system change, not climate change. We know that in order to make sure that meaningful action happens, we need to be changing the systems and using the systems as a way of creating transformative, meaningful action. And this is also a great quote from our allies at Neighbor to Neighbor. I am well if you are well. I think this is particularly relevant right now as we think about folks struggling in light of the current crisis, that's the health crisis as well as the climate crisis. And I think it's important for us to think about how we can stand in solidarity with folks most impacted by both of these crises, even when we are physically distanced. And the important thing that I want to emphasize is that action is the only way to stop climate change, and we know that collective action is always most impactful. So individual action is great, but when communities stand up and take action, that's when we see really meaningful change happen. And this is a graphic that I personally love. Its motto is "Don't panic, organize." There's strength in numbers, and people power is often the most powerful tool that we have. So with that being said, I'm going to hand things over to Carol Oldham, our Executive Director, to talk about acting on the local level.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. And I know that town meeting is essentially on hold for everybody. And in many cases, city councils are also pretty much on hold because the vast majority of the focus is on dealing with the health crisis that we have before us right now, as it should be. But at some point, town meeting is going to happen. And I did a webinar the other night with a bunch of folks on the Cape that are doing climate emergency declarations. And they were asking about sort of what can I do to keep organizing at this moment until we know when town meeting is going to happen. And so we walked through some of those things, and then I thought, probably some other people would be really interested in this. So it's a little different, but a lot of it is the same. Basically, just some of the ways that we're doing things are a little bit different. So when you're aiming for winning a warrant article in town meeting, you obviously need to find and build your team. You want to meet with your team. Right now, that's not in person, that's virtually. And you want to meet with elected leaders and boards and go to hearings, again, once those start happening again, and get endorsements from groups and influencers. Next slide, please. So the ideal team size has been shown to be 5 to 7 people. There are a lot of studies on this. If you don't already have a team, you may already know who those 5 to 7 people who are going to work with you are. But if you don't, then you might want to start, if you've got 2 or 3 people, maybe it's you and somebody else, you might be able to sit down and identify 2 or 3 people that each of you know in town who might be a good first ask for your team. These ideas of sort of where to find folks are a little bit Cape specific. You'll see, not everybody has turtle rescue teams, for instance, but those, there are a lot of people who might not have been involved in your climate action yet, but are sympathetic and can be great team members for getting a warrant article passed at town meeting. Some of these are really obvious, but some of them might be a little bit further afield for some of you. Next slide. We did a couple webinars, again, we're going to send these slides out, but we did a couple webinars about ways to organize while we can't sit down together. So we use the Google platforms, the Google Suites, And so, so that's Google Docs and Google Slides and Google Hangouts. And so we did a webinar about sort of how to use those to keep your team working together. We also did a webinar about the different meeting platforms and what some of the pros and cons of each of them are. So I want to encourage folks to go ahead and take a look at those if you are not already meeting somewhere online, or if the 40-minute Zoom thing is a little too short for you. Next slide. So I want to encourage folks to take this time, once you've built your team, to go ahead and meet with some of your decision makers. So that might be your, we think of them as your targets. And Rebecca, we got one slide too far. But this would be like folks on your board of selectmen, and you may know who is already a champion on your board of selectmen, and so it's a great idea to sit down one-on-one with them. Again, this might be a Zoom call, it might be a phone call, and just talk to them about your warrant article or your bylaw that you want to put in front of town meeting. And they can often, if you have a champion on the Board of Selectmen, they can be really helpful convincing their colleagues. So turn them into your best ally. When we get to this moment where there are boards and committees meeting again, make sure that you go to all of these hearings. And again, think about, this is something that you can do with your team. Brainstorm who on your various committees in your town might already be on your side, and then work to have one-on-one conversations with them, because that is something that you can do now while you're sitting at home. And then don't ignore your town staff. Sometimes they can be really great champions. Having somebody like your town manager on your side, or, in larger towns, sometimes there's a planning department or something like that. They can be really, really helpful. And if nothing else, it's worthwhile to have the conversation with them so that they are not opposing you. They might not come over full-throated to your side, but they can certainly be helpful just in answering questions from your Board of Selectmen, from your City Council, whoever that is, if they're a little more comfortable with your issue. Next slide. Yes. And then last but not least, I really encourage folks to think about getting endorsements. A lot of you have run and won town meeting victories in the past, and one thing that can be really a really simple way to create the feeling of winning before you win, which is, all these studies show that people really want to be on the winning side. So, so creating that feeling of winning before you are winning yet is really important. And so getting endorsements is a key piece of that. And it can be, you can just write a couple sentences about your warrant article and ask people to sign on. This is actually a moment where you can do this electronically pretty easily. You could do something like a Google form, and, ask people to ask their friends, families, neighbors, any boards that they sit on, to go ahead and give endorsements. And this is a great time to get existing groups in town or organizations that might be good on your issues to go ahead and endorse you, and this might, or endorse your warrant article. And this would be something like, let's say if you've got an Audubon in your town, or you have a Mothers Out Front group, or a Friends of a Park. Those folks are likely on your side when it comes to climate issues, and they can be really helpful. And then, of course, experts that would be thought leaders on your issue, that would be known names when somebody saw your endorsement list, would be really helpful. So that is sort of my wrap on what you can do on your town meeting warrant article at this time. I think that's right. Next slide.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carol. We are going to turn things over to Drew Grandy.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Carol. And just a reminder for everyone that there is a chat option. If you have questions during the presentation, please drop your questions in there, and we will be doing a moderated Q&A at the end of this. For this section here, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about a local action that everyone can take, and that is about residential conservation services. This is the state of Massachusetts, I'm sorry, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts energy efficiency plans are all housed in the residential conservation services, and this is a division of DOER. Residential conservation services were formed in 1980, and if you've ever participated in the Mass Save program, you've participated in the RCS program as well. We can go on to the next slide. So residential conservation services has affected everyone in the state except, surprise, surprise, anyone who lives in a municipal light plant territory. Up until this year, municipal light plants have been exempted from the residential conservation services and have not had to do any kind of official mandated energy efficiency plan. But that all changed in January of this year when new guidelines for municipal light plants was agreed upon and passed by DOER and put into effect. Now, up until today, word was that municipal light plants needed to file their yearly energy efficiency plans with DOER by May of 2020, so it's just a month away. We are expecting that deadline will be pushed back at least a month. It's not official yet, but we are expecting that. We can go on to the next slide. So those efficiency plans, there's a couple great things in there that they're capable of doing. So multiple municipal light plants can work together either on their own, or they can work with their representative industry groups like Energy New England or Mass Municipal Wholesale Electric Corporation, also known as MWEC. Some of the things that are in there are budgetary, minimum budgetary requirements. So there's a minimum amount that each MLP needs to spend money on. When someone does a home energy assessment through an approved vendor, they will get a home scorecard after their energy assessment, so you know how your home stacks up against other ones. There's also annual targets and annual reporting that MLPs need to do with DOER, and there's expected, not official yet, but expected that there will be a municipal working group formed by DOER to review all of those plans. And we can go on to the next slide. So action items to take away from here: reach out to your municipal light plan. Let them know that you're excited about the inclusion of municipal light plans in residential conservation services for the first time. Let them know you want to be a part of it. Offer to help them write their plan, help to offer them review, help to offer to technical input or stakeholder input, or to just review the plan, or see if they are doing a public meeting on what that plan is going to look like. But that is coming up, but they are going to be looking forward. I think there's a good opportunity for the light plants to know that you are interested in this and know that there's people out there watching what they're doing and taking an interest in their plan as well. And I think that's my last slide.
Thank you so much, Drew. I'm going to turn things over now to Mish McCall to talk about how you can take action on the state level.
Hi all, I'm Mish. Thank you, Rebecca and Carol and Drew. I'm excited to hear the rest of this after this. The Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs held a public meeting over a webinar last week, and this meeting was in response to the Global Warming Solution Act from 2008, and that act established a framework to address the effects of climate change in the Commonwealth by reducing emissions to levels that scientific evidence had suggested that we needed. So this was also furthered by Governor Baker's announcement that Massachusetts, goal is to be net zero by 2050. So all of this comes together, and it now is called the 2050 Decarbonization Roadmap Study. And it has two parts to it, as you see in the bottom of the slide. One is a study on every sector that is a large producer of climate change causing pollution, and then one puts everything together. And the administration asked for input, so MCAN wrote a letter that has several priorities. Next slide. All right, so our letter, as a comment and input for this 2050 roadmap study, first of all, we want greenhouse gas reduction. So our ask is that we want a 60% reduction by 2030 and 100% reduction of human-caused pollution by 2050. So those are our two main goals. And then the rest of our goals are we need to prioritize environmental justice communities as much as we can in this process. Their experiences are the most important when defining issues and outcomes that they need. Third is biomass incineration causes carbon pollution and puts particulate matter into the air. So Massachusetts shouldn't include biomass as a carbon-free power source. And then fourth, we have municipal light plants. So Drew was just talking about this. Municipal light plants make up 14% of our Commonwealth's energy use, and we cannot make it to 100% without including energy sources outside of National Grid and Eversource. And then at the very bottom, we have if there's no other pathway to zero by 2050, zero pollution, zero emissions. Another policy that can help our Commonwealth drive down climate pollution is carbon pricing. This solution, however, must address the needs of environmental justice communities and those already burdened by pollution and those who are dependent on fossil fuel economies in different ways. Those are 5 main points. Next slide. Okay, so the font on this is a little small, but we're going to be sending out these slides so you can look at those links later. But there are 3 very simple actions you can make, and it kind of it's easier to harder down the slide. So the first one is you can sign our letter that we had written. So it has those 5 main points, and you can go to our Google Forms. The next level of action, you can write your own comments. So they're asking that you write comments about the 2050 emissions limit, and it's on a mass.gov website. Or you can write an entire comment letter for your chapter or your community and have other people sign on, and you can also send that to the EEA. So all of these comments are due April 10th by 5 p.m., so it needs to happen in the next few days. But it would help a lot to write a short comment and also sign our letter would be great actions for you to take in the next few days.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mish. I'm going to speak for just a moment about things we can do on the legislative level, and then I will turn it back over to Carol. So as always, we want folks to be in touch with your state decision makers. It's important that you're staying in contact with your representative. And our main ask right now is for the session to be extended so that we have time to pass legislation that focuses on climate and energy, because the legislature is understandably overwhelmed right now thinking about how we can address the needs of folks most affected by COVID. So we want there to be extra time so that we can make sure that our energy bills that we've been advocating for nearly 2 years now don't get lost in this. And in the meantime, what's really important to do is to make sure that we're elevating environmental justice priorities, such as eviction moratoriums, full health coverage, and free testing for all. And we are happy to answer questions about this offline. But for now, I will turn it back over to Carol and to Ann Gilmore from Brookline.
Great. So folks may have heard a little bit about this issue, but we wanted to, and anybody who's part of a Unitarian Universalist group has probably heard more than others about this, but we're lucky enough to have Anne, who has a tribal connection, here on the line with us to tell you about what's happening with the Mashpee Wampanoag and what you can do to be helpful. Anne, are you able to be heard?
Yes. Can you hear me?
I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Carol. I really welcome this opportunity to share this information with everyone about what's happening to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. Let me just introduce myself a little more by saying I live in Jamaica Plain, and I first became involved with the Mashpee Wampanoags in the 1970s when I was a junior member of a legal team representing them in federal district court in Boston, when they sought the return of their then 16,000 acres of land in Mashpee, which had been taken illegally in 1870, but had not been developed for 100 years. So they still had the use and occupancy of their land until the 1970s. Anyway, at the trial, we never got to present the land claim. Instead, the lawyers for the real estate developers shifted the issue to tribal status and claimed that the Mashpees did not qualify as a federally recognized tribe. So we had 40 days of trial on that issue, and the judge decided they could be a tribe for any purpose under law except for the purpose of recovering their land. So that began a 40-year effort to gain federal recognition. And after the trial was over, I eventually married one of the tribal leaders. And so for the last 40 years, I've been part of a extended Mashpee Wampanoag family. My husband worked for the rest of his life to try to get the tribe recognized by the federal government. Did not live to see it. It didn't come until 2007. And then in 2015, what little scraps of land they had left were taken into trust by the federal government, some in Mashpee, some in Taunton. They broke ground on a new government building. They broke ground on a casino and entertainment center development in Taunton. Then they were challenged by some Taunton residents who were funded by a rival casino developer. And things got bogged down in federal court, and the court ruled that the Bureau of Indian Affairs had to reconsider their ruling about why they had taken the lands into trust. And so there was to be a hearing, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs had told the tribe they would, represent them, and they would give a new rationale that they thought would satisfy the judge. And 1 hour before that hearing, they notified the tribe that they had gotten a message from the White House and that they were to stand down and not represent the Mashpees. So the Mashpees then filed a lawsuit in Washington, D.C., which is still pending, saying that the Department of the Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs, had no authority to withdraw from their federal trust relationship. And so things have kind of been in limbo. There was legislation introduced in the House of Representatives to reaffirm their reservation lands. That passed the House with wide bipartisan support. It's been stalled in the Senate for 2 years. So they've kind of been in a limbo since 2018. And last Friday, when they were expecting a call from the Department of or the Bureau of Indian Affairs, all the tribes were expecting calls as to what the aid they were going to be given to deal with the virus, the epidemic. And instead, when they took their call last Friday at 4 o'clock, they were informed that the Bureau was going to be taking their lands out of trust, disestablishing their reservation. And the tribal leaders were in shock. They asked a lot of questions. They didn't get any answers over the phone. And so they really still are in a state of shock because this announcement, this decision, it's unclear how this is to be implemented, but basically it threatens their ability to continue to govern themselves. They have a housing development underway for tribal members that this puts in jeopardy. They've brought their language back virtually from the dead and have this thriving language program. They have a language immersion school for their children. It threatens the continuation of that school. It threatens their provision of health services to their members, and it threatens the preservation of their traditional lands for the current generation and generations yet to come. So this action on last Friday, it's an outrage. It's been denounced by the National Congress of American Indians as a devastating blow not only to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, but to all of Indian country, especially during this pandemic. And it, like so many other instances that we could give in this under this current administration, it violates the federal government's trust responsibility. They're supposed to safeguard tribal nations and their lands. Instead, they're seizing lands all over Turtle Island. This action has also thankfully been strongly condemned by our Massachusetts senators, Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey, and also Bernie Sanders, along with the representative from the Cape, Bill Keating, and along with former Vice President Joe Biden. Here is the tribal chairman's response to this outrage. I just want to share this because I think it's well written. We, the people of the First Light, have lived here since before there was a Secretary of the Interior, since before there was a state of Massachusetts, since before the Pilgrims arrived 400 years ago. We have survived. We will continue to survive. These are our lands. These are the lands of our ancestors, and these will be the lands of our grandchildren. This administration has come and it will go, but we will be here always, and we will not rest until we are treated equally with other federally recognized tribes and the status of our reservation is confirmed. Katapatanamu, thank you, Chairman Cedric Cromwell, also known as Running Bear. So I think it's very important for people to know about this, what has happened. And there are some things that the tribe has reached out and asked people to do. So there's a number of things, but we've picked the top three to pass along to you all and hope that you can take the time to do this in the coming few days. There's a petition going around to call on Congress to pass the Mashpee Wampanoag Tribal Reservation Reaffirmation Act. The passage of that bill, and it would have to be signed by the president, would resolve this whole limbo legal situation that they've been put in by the Trump administration. And it would reaffirm their tribal reservation. I mean, it's only a small percentage of a fraction of 1% of their original land, but nonetheless, it's important land. The second ask is to call Senator John Hoeven of North Dakota. He is the chairman of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and the bill is just sitting stalled in that committee, and please ask him to move on that bill and get it out of committee. And the third is if you are able to make a donation to the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe through their official website. You have a link there. They're really in need of funds to continue to try to fight this, and any amount that you could donate would be greatly appreciated. So thank you for this opportunity to share this information.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I just want to remind folks that we are going to send the slides to you, as well as the recording of this webinar. And so you can tell that some of these links in the slides are clickable. You will be able to click on them. Don't worry, we will send them to you. So thanks so much, Anne. We really appreciate you giving us all that great background and telling us what the great steps are that folks can take to stand in solidarity with the Mashpee Wampanoag Nation. Very much appreciated. So we have reached our Q&A section. And I imagine that there may be a few folks that have questions for you, but I've got a couple already lined up about some other issues. So Drew, can you explain to folks what a municipal light plant is?
Sure, I would love to, because it's one of the most top things that I enjoy talking about. So most people in Massachusetts are receiving their electricity from an investor-owned utility, and in this case, the two major ones are Eversource and National Grid. There are 40 communities in Massachusetts that run their own municipal light plant, so they can generate, distribute electricity out to their customers. So some examples of these are Taunton, Belmont, Concord, Middleborough, Holyoke, South Hadley. They are all relatively small, but collectively they make up about 15% of the electric load in Massachusetts.
Great. Drew, do you want to take us away with a few more questions that have been entered in the chat?
Hold on one second. We'll ask that if you are not speaking to please put yourself on mute. And okay, let me get back into the questions now.
So I saw one that was for Mish, which was, Mish, can you just tell folks what the comment deadline is, and maybe a little bit about what EEA in particular is looking for in those comments?
Yeah, definitely. So the deadline is Friday at 5 p.m., so by the end of the workday. And they are especially looking for comments that are about the emissions limit. So they are primarily focused on what I said first was like 60% reduction by 2030 and 100% reduction of human-caused pollution by 2050. So that's the main thing that they're focused on. But I know a lot of people are making comments about municipal light plants, or they are most interested in environmental justice. So comments are really broad, but they're mostly focusing on input about the limit in particular.
And just as a reminder, we will be sending out these slides. One of the slides that Mish did during their presentation has our form that you can click on that has our sort of talking points of those top things that we'd like you guys to ask for. It really helps for us all to be asking for the same thing, to have a unified voice, at least in sort of the 30,000 foot level, the broad level. And then folks can get into the details if you really want to put together your own comments. So maybe this one I could answer. We've got a question about, do we have advice for folks who are looking on how to write warrants or bylaws for towns without any climate regulations currently in place? So, and then we also had a question about what is a Board of Selectmen? And I'm using an outdated term because the Mass Municipal Association actually changed the name to Select Board, which is great. And so so that it's like a city council, but for a town. And actually the power is a little bit more dispersed via town meeting. So we actually have, on our website, we have a local clean energy toolkit that has some warrant articles that you could get passed in town. We have sample language for some of those. Our team is happy to work with you in your community to get something passed in your town meeting, again, when town meeting happens. And one of the nice things about the way that the toolkit is set up is that it starts out by sort of figuring out where you are as a community, and then giving you some advice about where to get started. So it starts you with some stuff that's a little more it's a little more basic, sort of the building blocks to be able to get to more significant climate victories over time. So definitely be in touch if you want to do something in your town meeting when it happens, and take a look on our website at the local clean energy toolkit. We also had a couple of different questions about doing community organization outreach and faith community outreach. I don't know, Rebecca or Drew, if one of you guys wanted to take a whack at answering that.
I'm sorry, Carol, could you say it again? I was reading other questions in the chat.
So we had a couple of questions about doing outreach to community organizations or community groups or churches or other faith communities, and best ways, best practices for doing that.
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump into that one, and I'm sure Rebecca will have some thoughts as well after I speak. I think one of the first things to do is be approachable, just like you would want other people to be receptive to you. So introduce yourself, understand that your priorities are not necessarily someone else's priorities, and sometimes it is being able to sit down, have a conversation with someone, but not necessarily expecting a response back right away. So going in, introduce yourself, talk with them, let them know what you're concerned about, get to know what they're concerned about as well, and let the conversation proceed from there. Don't expect them to jump right on to your cause right away. I think a lot of times we feel like we have the facts and information on our side, and then we just don't understand why they didn't just jump up and join us at the committee meeting room. But those are relationships that can take time, and you need to give them time to develop.
Yeah, I think that's super well put, Drew. And I like the emphasis on continuing to build relationships even in this time of physical distancing. Something else that I would add is that this is a great moment to be tapping into your network's relationships. So if you're part of a local climate group and you want to do outreach to faith-based organizations, it might be worth checking in with some of the folks that you're already working with to see if they have those existing relationships and would be interested in making that first touch. So I think, yeah, again, just emphasizing the fact that we are not all distanced, and this is definitely an opportunity for coalitions to continue to build and for diverse groups to come together.
Yeah, what is it that folks are saying? Physically distant, socially connected. So we are all still connected, and we appreciate that about you guys joining us tonight. And I don't know if you're still on, but we have a question about other tribes, which I don't know the answer to, and you might be able to answer.
I'm still here. I'm sorry, what's the question?
Fabulous. So the question is, are there other tribes that are across the U.S. that are suffering similar land grabs? This sounds like a way to marginalize Native people so that fossil fuel infrastructure can be more easily sited.
Yes, that's a great question, and it is happening all over the country. I don't have at my fingertips the names of the tribes and the lands, but you may have heard, I mean, periodically it's in the news that the Trump administration wants to seize public lands, and often these public lands are unceded, meaning they were never given up by the tribe in that traditional area. And they often have, either coal or gas or oil discovered underneath them. And then throughout history, it's not just this administration, those lands will be seized, but this administration is taking it to a new level. And it's really, it's just, I think under cover of this pandemic crisis, I think they're trying to do all that they can to seize lands and remove any restrictions from development on them. I also have been hearing a lot about what's going on in the Navajo Nation, which is one of the largest tribal nations in the country. They are located in what is now known as Arizona, New Mexico, and they have a reservation the size roughly of West Virginia. And because of the poverty and the lack of, health services, they're really suffering significantly per capita from this epidemic, and so that's also a big concern. There's a lot of poverty and crowding and not healthy living conditions on a lot of reservations, so they're very vulnerable to the virus as well.
Thank you, Anne. We've got a question which I don't know that I know the answer to, which is, what is the status of the Canadian hydro transmission line, which is proposed to come through Maine? Drew, do you by any chance know the answer to this? I was tracking it for a while, and then I admit I lost track of it.
I'm going to admit that I'm in the same boat as you, and I do not have an answer to that.
Yeah, I was paying attention when they were talking about going through the White Mountain National Forest for a while, and then the siting board in New Hampshire rejected it. And so, of course, they decided to try going through Maine, and I think Maine has had trouble finding a way to reject it in the way that New Hampshire was able to. And so I apologize to the questioner, but I don't actually know if that transmission line has been approved or not. I do know that that this administration here in Massachusetts has been, a lot of their climate planning has been heavily dependent on having that hydropower from Quebec. And actually, just to link together some of these issues, there's also native land that's proposed to be impacted up there for the HydroQuebec project. So there are definitely First Nation issues happening all over when it comes to energy issues. Did anybody see any other questions that we need to make sure to answer before we let everybody go? Are there grants? This is a question that we just got. Are there grants to fund? You guys may get a chance to see my cat. He's very fascinated by the fact that I'm doing a puzzle on the table. And so he really wants to come and be a part of everything that's happening on this table. So the question is, are there grants to fund the additional capital cost of making a new building more energy efficient? So there actually, it depends on the type of building. And in many cases, making a building more energy efficient actually pays for itself. But there are certainly grants available for more efficient heating and cooling systems, for instance, through the Mass Save program. And Rebecca, are you comfortable talking at all about the Passive House Design Challenge?
Sure. So there's been an incentive to build more passive house in Massachusetts, which is essentially a standard for buildings that ensures that they're extremely energy efficient. that they require very little energy to be run. And there is, I'm not 100% sure what the current status is around the initiative, but I know that there is an existing pot of money within the Mass Clean Energy Center to fund that work.
Great. Yeah, and there's also money for training construction workers, design professionals, et cetera, from Mass Save. They've done a series of trainings. And then we've got one last question, which is, where's your letter about the roadmap? It is, we'll send you the link so you can sign on to our comments. We'll send you that link as well as sending you the slideshow. All of the links are in the slideshow, and we will send you the recording of tonight. So thanks everybody for joining us. I hope that you are going home, or I guess staying home, ready to take more action and feeling inspired to keep moving on climate change. And we really appreciate all of you in the climate community and the climate action community always, but particularly at this moment when we're really appreciating all of our community. So you guys just get to see my cat. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your evening, and we will see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.